So hi everybody, welcome back to our massive open online class involving sports business yesterday, today, and tomorrow. As I think you probably heard on the introduction, I'm Rick Burton, and one of the best things I got to do in my career before I started teaching at Syracuse University was to be the Chief Marketing Officer for the United States Olympic Committee for the Beijing 2008 Olympics. So in today's class, I want to talk a little bit about the Olympic movement and specifically get into some of the areas like trends we're seeing in the sports world, but also what's going on with sponsorship. I think you're going to find it really interesting, and I'm excited to be a part of this program for you. So here's where I want to start off, and that's to give you kind of a very, very simple introduction to what marketing is and sponsorship. So many of you may be familiar with the company Nike, and they've always had a three-word slogan, just do it. In the United States with Budweiser beer, their slogan was King of Beers. And so what I discovered with my students at Syracuse was that a lot of times just having a three-word definition made it really easy for a student to kind of remember a concept. So I want to give you two concepts in today's segment. First one up. Marketing. An easy way maybe to understand marketing is, and here are the three words, creating compelling exchange. Now, what we mean by that is marketing has got to have a creative component, that's the creating. It's got to be compelling, it's got to cause someone to do something, to maybe spend money to buy a product or exchange their time. And there's that last word, exchange, which is you've got to get a customer, a consumer, to enter into an exchange, right? So marketing, creating compelling exchange. Now, let's build on that by taking the word sponsorship because it's such a key part of the sports industry. And here we can use that word creating again because we've got to be innovative. We've got to have words and visuals and audio, sound pieces that are going to make people excited. So we're going to use creating again, but this time it's going to be mutual. And we're going to talk about creating a mutual exploitation. Now, hold off on the word exploitation because that's going to bother some of you. But mutual, we're going to have maybe a sports event or a sports property, and then we're going to have a sponsor, let's say a Budweiser or a Nike. They each want something from the other. They want the excitement of the sporting event, and the sport event wants their money or maybe their advertising. And they're both going to, in a way, try to exploit each other, but in a way in which, let's use this mathematical equation, they're going to want to get 2 + 2 to equal 5. That by working together, the company, let's say the Olympics, let's say the sporting property, the Olympics or the National Football League or the Bundesliga in Germany or the EPL in England, the Australian Football League, and then Nike, that they're going to be able to get money from Nike and advertising, as I mentioned, but they're also going to be able to grow the popularity of the sport. And they're both going to try and work with each other. Now, the concept of sponsorship really goes back to the ancient Greeks. And sponsorship, if you were to look at the etymology, and that's a big Greek word really for what a word's origins were, really comes from the word horagos. And my apologies to anyone who actually speaks or reads Greek because I may not have pronounced it exactly the right way. But the word horagos means I lead the parade. And we can trace sponsorship back to its ancient roots where wealthy Greek citizens were actually charged with kind of funding, underwriting the cost of a local parade. And in exchange for underwriting those costs, they were given certain benefits in the local community. They would get to lay signage, if you will, at a statue to one of the Greek gods, right? So they would maybe get to put down their family name as a sign next to one of the god statues, right? They would get to wear the ceremonial color purple, so they were given special clothing. And in a lot of cases, they got to actually kind of train with or hang out with the athletes, if it was a gladiatorial contest, or the parade celebrants, the people who were going to actually be in the parade. So they got real access that they wouldn't normally have had. So that concept of I lead the parade is very much a part of how we understand sponsorship and why big organizations like Coca-Cola and Visa and McDonald's spend the hundreds of millions of dollars that they do to sponsor things like the Olympics or the World Cup, the World Rugby Cup. So there are a lot of different sports events that take place all over the world. Today's presentation is going to look specifically kind of at the Olympics. We'll talk a little bit about London 2012, which just took place, and then we'll look forward to Sochi in 2014, which is going to take place in Russia. what you're going to see on the screen now is kind of a listing of things that are going on, the biggest sports events in the world, the two biggest, and this is discounting what you may find in your local country, right? So Americans might be interested in the NFL. They might think that that's the biggest sport, and it is one of the biggest in the world, right? If I'm in England, it's the EPL. If I'm in Australia, it's the Australian Football League. But worldwide, taken as kind of a collaborative, the Olympics and FIFA's World Cup are the two biggest sports events in the world. And what you see on the slide there is that we just had the London Olympics 2012, spectacular games. And now coming up in 2014, we'll have the Sochi Olympics. But Russia's also going to get the World Cup in 2018. Now, look at what's going on in Brazil. And some of you may be familiar with the phrase, the BRIC countries, BRIC, which are Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Among those countries are the most populous countries, India and China. And with Brazil and Russia, you have two of the fastest growing economies in the world. So really no surprise that Brazil has got the World Cup in 2014 and the Olympics in 2016. And as you saw previously, the Russians have got the Olympics in 2014 and the World Cup in 2018. So proof for you that the BRIC concept is really at play. Interestingly, there will be no Summer Olympics or Football World Cups in the United States before 2024 at the earliest. And so that has meant that for a lot of the American sponsors, for them to be associated with sport, they're going to really have to go on the road. So let's talk about going on the road versus having a sport played locally. Sports really have enduring local roots. That's where people get to go and see the game in person and actually have a fan avidity, maybe for a favorite team or a favorite player. But increasingly in the last 20 years, what's happened is sport has really become a global business concept. And what that means is that a lot of people are now starting to watch sports that are taking place somewhere else in the world. Really kind of interesting if you think about it. And the example that I use in my classes at Syracuse are the Indian Cricket League, the Indian Premier League, the IPL, has actually got their broadcast rights on YouTube, which means that anybody anywhere can watch the IPL, and they're not disadvantaged by what time the game was being played in India. They didn't have to stay and watch it at 3 in the morning or at 7 in the morning. When they were ready to watch Indian cricket, they could go to YouTube and they could get the latest game and it would be offered to them there. But let's talk about how all these different sport organizations are starting to play their games in different places. The NBA now regularly plays games in China. And they're talking about the possibility, the feasibility, if you will, of having some of their teams be based in countries like England and have a team in London, or maybe in Germany with a team in Berlin. The NFL, the National Football League, plays games in London and China. The National Hockey League plays games in Sweden and in different places in Europe. And of course, we're familiar with mega sports like Formula One, golf, and tennis, which have really a global tour. And those events, whether they're auto racing, golf, or tennis, are played all over the world at different times during the calendar year. Now, sport is really beneficial in that way, and it operates in a multi-platform setting, which is that we can watch sport on TV, we can watch it on an iPad, we can watch it online, we can watch it more or less through the magazines or newspapers that we may like to read. And in the last couple of years, there have been some real opportunities created around sport and its globality. So let me give you some context, some data that will probably help you put what I would say is the sports world in some kind of a contextual setting. The size of the global sports industry was back in 2009, probably about $115 billion. Now that's US, so currency you'd have to convert it if you're watching this in Europe or in Australia, somewhere else in the world. But the estimates are that we're headed towards probably $150 billion US by the year 2015. And that's a pretty aggressive growth rate that we've seen for sport all over the world. Now, the growth by region has been much more in the Asia-Pacific area, where the growth is almost 4% annually, and in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Slowing down a little bit in North America, but some real growth opportunities in Latin America, and we're seeing that with Brazil really emerging as one of the world's, I think it's going to be safe to say, one of the world's foremost sport-based countries. And that's really exciting because for too long, for a lot of people, sport has maybe had its roots and maybe a lot of its centering in Europe and in North America. And what we're finally seeing now is that the globality of sport and the digital nature of sport, how it can be transported so easily by way of the internet or by way of online viewing, is causing sport to actually take off now in places where traditionally it was not as large. Now, let's also talk about sectors. You'll see on the screen that there are 4 different ways that we can think about what to call the sports industry. We can talk about gate revenue, which are tickets, people going to the event. And you'll see there that it says that this is about 38% of all revenue that's generated in the sports world comes from gate revenue. This is the largest sector, but it's had the slowest growth over time because stadiums actually have fixed capacities. So if you build a 70,000 seat stadium and you fill it, you can't really grow it the next year and have more people come to the stadium. And that explains in part why gate revenue is a little bit slow right now. Now, the way you get around that is by raising the ticket prices. But the more you raise the ticket prices, the harder it is for different segments of the society, let's say the poor or the middle class, to be able to go to the stadium. So stadium operators face a real challenge all the time as to how much they can raise their ticket prices, knowing they generally have a fixed attendance capacity. Sponsorship, though, is the fastest growing. You see there that it's about 26% of the 100% pie. And that's because a lot of sponsors are realizing that they can talk to customers all over the world through sport. And sport is one of those things that is kind of a universal language. You know, for a lot of people, it may be inappropriate to talk about religion, or it may be inappropriate to talk about politics, but very few people are offended by talking about sport. So it's real easy for someone to be a fan of a sports team or of a type of sport, and the sponsors and advertisers realize this. And so a lot of them are saying, hey, I want to have my product visible to the largest possible global audience. Let's look around at what sport properties have massive worldwide attention. So things like the Olympics or the Football World Cup actually give them that opportunity. Now, media rights, the third one on the list, a lot of long-term contracts here. Media organizations, whether we're talking about companies like ESPN or the BBC, Sky, Fox, these types of organizations are interested in buying up long-term rights to be able to broadcast events and sporting competitions that they believe are going to be most attractive to the people who watch sports. So you can imagine that the Olympics has got one of the largest popularity bases, and that's because you have both male and female athletes involved, and it takes place every 2 years. So there's kind of a supply and demand. You've got high demand, but it's only offered to you once every 2 years, the Summer Games and then the Winter Games. Winter is next in 2014, summer in 2016, and all the countries of the world pretty much are involved with the Olympics. So there's a chance, and I saw this firsthand in Beijing, where 205 countries marched in the opening ceremonies. So if I'm from a very small country that may not have much of a sporting history, but we've sent one of our athletes to the games, then there's a chance my athlete in my country is going to be featured in the Olympics. World Cup's a little harder. There's only 32 teams that make it, but football has just such a massive appeal worldwide that FIFA never has any trouble selling its sponsorship or its media rights. Last piece on our slide is merchandising, and some of you right now might be wearing a shirt or a hat that has maybe a team or a sport logo on it. Those merchandising rights are very much evident in North America, but we see it also in Europe, where people buy the kits, buy the clothing that allows them to connect with their favorite team or their favorite player. So that's a little bit of a background on the industry sectors. Let's talk about sponsorship data. Now, worldwide sponsorship is projected at about $35 billion, maybe as high as $50 billion by 2015. And that's a lot of money being spent by a lot of different sponsors in a lot of different places who are trying to take advantage of the benefits that sport provides. We talked a little bit before that sport doesn't tend to be political, and it doesn't really tend to be offensive to a lot of people. Now, I can tell you that when my favorite team loses, I kind of take it personally. And there's actually a psychosocial term, that's called cutting off reflected failure. I'll give you kind of a side concept in the way that I teach. If you're a fan of a team and your team does really well, a lot of times a lot of us will say, we won. We kind of make ourselves an artificial member of the team. We're doing so great lately. And that's called birging, B-I-R-G, and it's called basking in reflected glory. And we know that a lot of sports fans all over the world tend to bask in the reflected glory of how their favorite team does if their team is winning. And that's why they say things like, we won or we're winning, right? And that's the reflected glory that we want to be a part of. But when our favorite team loses, then we do what's called cutting off reflected failure. And the letters in English are C-O-R-F, corfing. What we talk about is instead of we lost, I suddenly have nothing to do with our team losing. It's they lost, they're horrible, they suck, right? So that's corfing. And it's an interesting concept that when we look at sponsorship, we know that before the game is played, before the season is finished, that if I sponsor someone's favorite team or favorite player, an endorsement deal, or I sponsor the sport that someone is really committed to, that in that period of basking in the reflected glory, I'm really appreciative of what that sponsor has done to make it possible maybe for me to see my sport or for my team to perform well. So sponsors know that there's a real connection between the fan, the spectator, and their favorite sport or team. Now this explains in part, and you see on the chart on the screen, why sponsorship growth has been so strong in the last few years. The estimated sports sponsorship in North America, and the number you see is a little bit dated, is about $12 billion, higher now because you're seeing this in 2013, but it's about 70% of all sponsorship spending. PricewaterhouseCoopers, which is a big kind of economics accounting firm, projects that North American sponsorship was going to grow at 5% in 2012 and 5.6% in 2013. Those are pretty good growth rates. Now, total advertising has continued to decline over the last few years because of the way media is changing, but it still has a massive base. But you'll see here it says nearly 2/3 of those people who are involved in sponsorship believes that it offers much wider reach and impact for a brand than advertising does. And the reason is because advertising is kind of considered one-dimensional. If you're looking at something online and an ad pops up, or you're watching TV and an ad comes on the screen, there's not really a way for that to be dimensionalized. But if you're at the stadium and you can smell the food and you can see the crowd and you can feel all the excitement that's in the air, the sponsorship is actually a lot more engaging for you. And that's why you'll see a lot of sponsorship at every sporting event around the world, except in general the Olympics. And that's because the Olympics makes a decision to have a clean competitive setting. And by clean, I mean that next time you watch the Olympics or even you look at old footage of the Olympics, you'll see that there's no signage in the stadium at all. No beer, no cigarette, no ads for McDonald's, none of that exists in the inner bowl of the stadium, and that's because the Olympics wants that competition to be clean. Now what they do though is they sell exclusivity to a number of sponsors that allows them to actually become the official brand, let's say the official beer of the Olympics or the official car, the official bank, those kinds of things. So let me give you some examples. And in specific, what I'd like to talk to you about is what went on in London. We'll get into this in part 2 of this session. Hope to see you back soon.